Let's start in Virginia. Recently, voters approved a measure to redraw the state's congressional map. On the surface, this seems like a routine local issue. Look at this map. A near-even 6-5 split gets wiped out, aggressively redrawn into an overwhelming 10-1 Democratic supermajority. The boundaries are so extreme, even Virginia's redistricting architect called it cheating. Look at this district, a sprawling, tentacled shape out of a Lovecraft novel. That single map in Virginia represents the first engagement in a national sequence, a synchronized playbook senior strategists refer to as Project 2029. Listen to how James Carville recently instructed his party to pull this off. He explicitly told them to hide their true agenda from the public, run as moderates, tell the voters what they want to hear, and then wait until they seize total power to execute the plan. This strategy uses a standard election to smuggle in structural changes, rewriting the government's internal mechanics until the ruling party becomes a permanent fixture. Step 1 relies on aggressive gerrymandering in firmly blue states. By locking down seats in California, New York, Maryland, and Virginia, they build an impenetrable firewall in the House, completely insulated from the national popular vote. Once that House advantage is secured, Step 2 begins. They combine that rigged baseline with historical midterm trends and years of ongoing legal investigations into Donald Trump to systematically sweep both the Senate and the White House. Securing all three branches by 2028 is the objective, but it isn't the finish line. It is strictly a prerequisite. It gives them the absolute authority needed to launch institutional changes that cannot be reversed. Step 3 attacks the judicial and legislative math. This graphic shows the Supreme Court expanding from 9 to 13 seats. Because adding new justices only requires a simple congressional majority, they can completely bypass the need for a constitutional amendment and install an engineered supermajority overnight. Then they address the legislature. They propose granting immediate statehood to Washington, D.C., a territory that has historically voted over 90% Democratic in every recent election. They combine that by pushing statehood for Puerto Rico, another territory that leans heavily toward the Democratic demographic. A gerrymandered map can eventually be undone after a census. A packed court can theoretically be unpacked, but statehood is permanent. Adding those two territories instantly guarantees 4 automatic Democratic Senate seats forever, breaking the Republican electoral math for good. Step 4 utilizes the newly packed court to clear the final legal obstacle. By immediately reversing the 2024 presidential immunity ruling, they remove the protection surrounding official acts, making every policy decision of the previous administration a potential criminal liability. This legal opening allows for what Governor J.B. Pritzker calls a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. While the historical South African model focused on amnesty to prevent civil war, Pritzker's version specifically demands criminal prosecution for those who carried out the previous administration's orders. Without immunity as a guardrail, the scope of the tribunal extends far beyond Donald Trump. It targets his cabinet, his legal advisors, and as Pritzker explicitly noted, the federal agents, ICE officers, and National Guard members who enforced his policies. The machinery of the federal government, backed by a friendly Supreme Court, allows for a strategy of attrition. Years of legal fees, depositions, and asset freezes can bankrupt and humiliate the opposition without ever needing to secure a final conviction. They achieve this strategy by launching multiple civil and criminal vectors simultaneously. When you layer massive civil suits that don't require criminal standards of proof on top of felony indictments, the targets are simply overwhelmed by the volume. Under this playbook, the Department of Justice would answer to a president dead set on prosecutions. The traditional norms that prevent the government from attacking political rivals are completely removed. Finally, Step 5 is the capstone. They open the border to establish a permanent path to citizenship for millions of undocumented immigrants. This final move is what makes the entire system self-sustaining. Mass amnesty permanently reshapes the national voting demographics. It builds an electoral firewall that protects the newly rigged system they just constructed. When you look at the entire Project 2029 architecture, one glaring theme emerges. Absolutely none of these policies require the underlying support of the American public to function. Gerrymandering nullifies the popular vote. Packed courts eliminate judicial checks. and manufacturing new states permanently breaks legislative parity. Now, the architects of this plan argue they are merely responding aggressively to previous Republican political hardball regarding redistricting in the courts. But standard political hardball is entirely different from a national bait-and-switch. Running as a moderate candidate to win an election, only to govern as a constitutional radical without voter consent, is a deliberate deception. History consistently proves a simple, uncomfortable truth. When a government re-engineers its institutions so that the ruling party mathematically cannot lose, it marks the definitive end of democracy and the beginning of authoritarianism.